Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing today? All right. Well, we're going to continue our series, My Crazy Family, and we've got some very, very special guests. I'm so excited for us to be able to kind of share with you principles that have to do with family, parenting, grandparenting, you know, the whole picture. And before I go any further, I just want to introduce you to some very, very special people. I want to start at that end there with Jason Walters, our student pastor. Okay. And Jason has 10 years experience in youth ministry, middle school, high school, but his experience goes way beyond that because Jason's family, his dad, mom, they were involved in student ministry. So Jason literally grew up with student ministry being all around him, and that's what he loves to do. It's what he's given his life to. And so Jason really understands a lot about middle school, high school, dealing with students. And so it's awesome to have you up here, Pastor Jason. So. And we have with us Dr. Sharon Otis, who's an amazing person. You know, Sharon and I have known each other for a long time, and I call her Sharon. She's got a doctorate, and I've got a master's, and we have an agreement. I don't call her doctor, and she doesn't call me master, so it works out. And Sharon has extensive experience. She's a retired teacher, counselor. She is the clinical director and owner of Family Care Counseling Center. She's vice chair for Youth for Christ. She's got 2 children, 6 grandchildren. She's written 17 books and manuals, extensive ministry right here in our area. It's gone on for a long time. So, and right here to my right is Uber Russ Duquette. A lot of people think your first name's Uber now that I said that. So Russ has been a part of us for a long time. Russ, as a matter of fact, when we first were putting this together, I went to Shelley and because Jason said, hey, you know, this would be great to expand this because so many issues that teenagers are facing are now getting pushed down to elementary age. And I went to Shelley and she says, Russ is your man. And Russ has been doing children's ministry for 32 years. Amazing. Russ, matter of fact, we've got Kingdom Hearts Kids Camp coming up, hence the shirt, okay? That's the Vanna White hand flip. I'm not high-fiving you. I've got to do the hand flip, and then I'll high-five you. So Russ really is the creator behind that. Russ is so creative. He's one of the best illustrators that I've ever seen. His drawings are absolutely phenomenal. He creates cartoon characters, uses them to teach children as well. Just amazing creativity and passion for kids to really know God's love. So today we're going to talk about issues facing the family. When we talk about family, of course, you know, what family is has changed and morphed over time. Family, whether we're talking single parenting, whether we're talking blended families, whether we're talking about grandparents who are now parenting grandchildren, or aunts and uncles that are parenting nieces or nephews, whether we're talking foster care, adoption, you know, it's all different now. But there are some things that are common amongst all of those, and we're going to hit on some of those things today. And to kind of help you to frame all of this, as a backdrop, I want you to just open up your heart to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. And you've got this in your outline, and it's up on the screen. And I want us to read this out loud together, okay? The Apostle Paul wrote this: "So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise." Great word. Be careful how you live. In other words, he's saying be intentional. Great families do not happen by accident. Great relationships, great parenting does not happen by accident. It's intentional. And he says, don't be like fools. And he doesn't mean, like in the Old Testament sense, fools were often rebellious people. He means don't be like people who live without wisdom when wisdom is so accessible. But instead, but be like those who are wise. And so today, here's my challenge to you. Take one thing away today that you're either going to apply to your family or you're going to pass on to a family member. Take one principle, one idea, one thought, one habit that you're either going to apply to your family or you're going to pass on to somebody within your family or family that you're aware of. As a matter of fact, one way that you could do it if you've got grown children is to go, you know what, if I were going to hit the redo button, that's what I would have done differently. And in that way, you're providing a moment there of healing of that, and you're also passing that on to them. So let me just encourage you to do that. The world has changed so much, and you know, kind of knowing what to focus on. You know, when we talk about parenting, there should be an overarching vision that you understand, that has your heart, that kind of helps guide you into the direction and the way that you do parenting. And so I just want to put it out there with you guys. So how do you approach parenting? What do you see as kind of that grand vision that helps you guys in ministry and stuff? And Jason, I want you to go first on this.
Sure. Something my wife and we heard it in church like years back when we were just met. And our goal is to create godly adults, not good kids. I think a lot of us focus so much on the here and now of minimizing our embarrassment. When we're in the grocery store, I have a 16-month-old, so sometimes those trips can be interesting, and so we get so focused on, oh my gosh, what are people thinking around me? And we start getting a really short-term vision rather than, hey, my goal is to create them to be a godly adult, someone who's going to make wise choices in adulthood and raise a family legacy of Christ. So that's what we strive for, and we talk about it all the time. We don't always succeed at it, but that's the goal, and that's our vision. And
that's a great word, because it's not about, you know, oh my goodness, look, my kid's throwing a tantrum here in the middle of the store. The way that you react is determined by what you see as a long-term vision, right? So if it's, oh, I'm so embarrassed, suddenly you're involved and you're doing all kinds of things to get your kid to calm down, versus if you're an adult, you know, raising an adult, it's like, well, okay, I'm going on to the next aisle, right? And you just begin to walk away and let them begin to experience the consequence.
It's not just reacting in the moment.
Yeah.
A lot of times we get in the trenches of parenthood and you just start acting in the moment rather than acting on what you know you're shooting for.
Yeah, that's good. The world has changed so much in the past 10, 15, 20 years. How has growing up in this world changed the things that we need to be thinking about as parents? And Sharon, I want you to kind of launch us on that.
Well, families are more stressed, and they have too much stimulus and a lot going on, and they don't take time to be present. And I always think of how in Exodus, how God revealed himself to Moses to be slow to anger, to be kind, to be truthful. And so just applying biblical principles to your family and working on yourself and making sure that you have time. I know that it was hard for me to take care of myself coming from what I came from, and to be present. And now I make sure that my yes is yes and my no is no, and I don't say yes to things when I really mean no and then resent doing them. So you want to just be, you know, looking to the Word for your answers and be growing in Christ's image. And as you grow, naturally, then your children will grow. And if you can pass those principles down, that's the most helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, parents, especially new parents, I find really, sometimes moms especially, just always feel like they're failing, because you're learning the whole time. And what you learn when you've been doing it for a while is you're still growing and you're still learning, and they're so young, they really aren't going to remember all of this right now. And so you're going to be fine. The key is to keep learning. Now, when we talk about kind of the challenges that kids face, what do you see, Russ, as such an issue with children?
I think now that there's so much media exposure and kids have access to everything, that there's no quiet place anymore. You know, I remember, I didn't always want to be quiet, but I remember as a kid, you know, having time when it was just me and my thoughts and who I thought God was. And it just seems like kids today just don't, even at a really young age, they're always on something, they're always watching something, they're always got something in their ears going in, and they've got all these voices, and God's a still small voice, and he's competing for room, and they're being trained not to hear him.
Yeah, and Sharon, that literally the electronic stimulation, all that stuff. There's scientific evidence of how that affects our brains, right?
It affects the circadian rhythm, and that is what affects your sleep. So even as adults, if we don't turn off electronics and the blue light, even the TV, 2 hours before we want to be asleep, it's going to affect our deep sleep, it's going to affect our sleep cycle. So circadian basically is your sleep cycle. So because I'm hyper, I go to bed around 10 to be asleep by midnight. And so everybody has some people can fall right to sleep. But if your children especially have that stimulus on, so most families I find, there's a rule, electronics are up by 8:30, 9 o'clock. And we need to be really mindful of that, because if you peek in on them, they might have their phone under their pillow or their iPad or whatever. And we're the adults, and we don't want to. We're responsible for how healthy they are, whether they eat protein, just like our vegetables, it's the same thing about electronics. It's the same rule. Just because it tastes good doesn't mean it's good for you.
Yeah, and so it interrupts, what was that rhythm?
Circadian
rhythm. So if you watch Star Trek, the Circadians, they needed lots of sleep, and that's where that comes from. So let me get on with Jason. You, what are some of the things you see? The whole electronics thing that affects so much now.
It's just the access. There's constant access. If we have a question, what do you say? Google it, we're constantly connected. And so our students now are technology natives, where a lot of us came into technology. Students have always had that. I mean, my 16-month-old can unlock a phone and take a picture. And yes. So it's one of those things where there's access to websites, social media, things. It's hard to keep up with all the different stuff that's out there with Reddit and Tumblr and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and Kik, and that's just a small list of the really popular ones. So it's just there's 24/7 access to the world and people they don't know but they're communicating with on their phones, And so that's the thing is students are dealing with now in middle school what I dealt with in high school. And I'm only 10 years removed from my high school graduation. So all the things that I thought were big, huge problems in high school, our middle schoolers, our sixth graders are dealing with. And so it's just crazy the amount of stuff being thrown at them at such a young age. It's hard for them to have a childhood because they're expected to be an adult so early.
And so middle schoolers are now having to deal with things that they wouldn't have been exposed to until high school, which means that elementary school kids are dealing with things that wouldn't have been exposed to them until middle school. So it's all getting pushed down. I mean, pornography, all kinds of things that are accessible, strangers, like you talked about. Sharon?
But development hasn't changed.
Right.
So we still develop at the same rate of speed. And so if your child is getting too much exposure to a stage that they're not ready for, and carrying luggage, it's just like when I talk to my teenagers about sex, I'm like, you're not ready for it yet. Forget the biblical aspect of it for purity. Let's just talk about logic. It's too big of a stage. And so, but back to electronics, I haven't mentioned this in either service, but their brains do get overloaded. So I think that's really important. So they're not ready for a lot of the overload. But another principle is communication is 11% words. So these kids are texting, they're on Facebook, and so they're not learning social skills. So they're not learning some natural things. So that's why it's important that you keep their, okay, you have from, 8:30 to 10:30 or whatever on a Saturday to catch up with your friends and stuff, but you can see how they misconstrue each other. I get misconstrued. Because I'm very to the point, and I come across, but they can't hear my heart on a text message or an email.
Yeah, that's good. Russ, you had something. Were you saying? No? Okay.
And I think even as parents, we have to guard against that. I think we are on phones a lot too, and I read a quote this week that I thought was amazing. The woman said, "I want my kids to remember the color of my eyes, not the color of my phone screen." And I just think, so many of us are not present. We're here and not engaged here. And so I think even we need to guard against that as people who are in the smartphone age.
Yeah, and so how many of you as parents or grandparents, you're like overwhelmed because the kids, they're natives to electronics. They know this stuff inside and out, and you're like concerned because you know that they can be in things. You don't know how to track it. You can set things in place. They find out how to circumvent them. Anybody just like concerned about technology and its place in the home, and how do you deal with that? It's a real common thing, and kids can find ways to get around things. So let's talk about how to safeguard kids when it comes to technology. Jason, you've mentioned something in the other services.
Yeah, if you go to Google and type in Disney Circle, it's something new that's coming out. You can actually set limits on apps on kids' phones, on internet usage. You can go on and set, Netflix only to, an hour a day, or Facebook to a certain games. You can go on and set all these parameters. It's like a $99 deal that you can buy, hook it up to your internet, and control all the devices on there. Because, like I said, there's so much there, it's hard to keep track. And so this kind of filters content for you so that it's easier to keep up with.
Yeah, that's a great tool. And sometimes I hear from parents, and when we talk about checking the phone, checking the computer, I hear this every now and then. Oh, but I don't want to invade my child's privacy. Okay, that's called hogwash. Okay, so that's the Greek word for it. But let me just no, this is exactly what we did. We put off cell phones in our family with our kids until as long as we possibly could. And they used to say, but my friends have cell phones. And I go, that's why you don't need one, because you're going to use theirs. And but when they hit freshman year high school, 8th grade, that range, we could see that it was going to be important. And here's exactly what I did, is I said, this is my cell phone. I'm going to loan my cell phone to you. And you don't have my permission to delete anything off of my cell phone. From time to time, I'm going to spot check my cell phone, and I'm going to see what messages you received and what messages you sent, and I'm going to check the pictures that are on there to make sure that you're handling my cell phone correctly. And I said, if I check the cell phone and I determine that you've deleted something without me giving you authority to do it, I'm going to take my cell phone back. But I'm going to loan it to you, and I'm going to check it from time to time. And because that's the truth. This is the same thing with computers. This is my computer. I'm going to let you use my computer. From time to time, I'm going to check my computer and see how you're doing with my computer. And if I determine that you're not able to handle my computer, I will take my computer back. This really kind of came to light one time. I took Jonathan, our youngest, to a coffee shop. I think he was maybe sophomore in high school. And we went to the coffee shop to hang out, and he'd gotten a cell phone. And I saw him walk out front because there were other students from school that were there. And while they're talking, a young lady came up to him, kind of skipping up there, and she looked at his cell phone, and she took it, and she wandered off with it while he kept talking to friends. A little while later, she came back with his cell phone and gave it back to him. I knocked on the window and waved him into the cafe. And here's what I told him. I said, when that girl walked away with your phone, you don't know if she went into the ladies' room and took a picture of her body part and put it on social media. Nobody knows who would have done that. You are your cell phone as far as everybody else is concerned. Anything that goes on social media from your cell phone is an expression of you. And I do not give you permission to loan my cell phone to anyone else. If someone else needs a phone call to make, you will stand there and you will dial the number, you will hand them the phone, and you'll listen to the conversation, and then you will take my cell phone back. And as long as you can do that, you can continue to use my cell phone. That's the reality of it. And we have to teach our kids, how to use these things. And you have to be a parent. Right? So often what's happening is parents are trying to become friends and buddies when our kids really need us to be parents. And so one of the things we've talked about in the past is child-centered parenting, which is really a big thing today. And we see kind of these things happening where it's all about the kids. And that doesn't work well, does it? What happens with child-centered parenting? What kind of things arise out of that?
I just thought of one I hadn't thought of. How many parents say to me, you have to realize I'm 40 years with children, I'm going to let them drink at home because they're going to drink anyways. If they don't have that structure within the home and the rules within the home, the children tell me, my teenagers tell me, my middle schoolers say, or they'll say, I did pot when I was your age. Don't tell your kids you did that, because you want to model. You can tell them when they're adults, no problem. But you don't, what it does is it normalizes it. And you need to be that rock and that model, not that we ever do it perfectly. There's no such thing as a perfect parent.
Yeah.
But we still have to aim for those goals. They need to see how we are conducting ourselves. I was home more when my children were teenagers than when they were little, because I needed to enforce curfew. How am I going to enforce curfew? And I was a single mom if I'm not going to be home. So just being that person in the home and being there when they're getting home and it's 5 o'clock or whatever, and just being available. So if you have the biggest change that we've seen besides stress is going from a parent-centered home to a child-centered home, then we raise entitled children. And I just had one of my parents talking to me after last service at how they give everything to the child and let them buy whatever they want to buy. Even with my grandchildren, they're given a certain amount of money. They have to learn how to budget it, spend it. Okay, so if you want to use next week's allowance, if you want that more expensive shirt, then next week you'll have to save for that instead of just buying them. Not that I don't indulge my grandchildren, but but I've always, even the dollar store. Here's your $2. Here's the tax. Getting them know how to manage so they make their own choices.
So there again, you're raising adults.
Yes.
When you do that. So
looking at the big picture.
With child-centered parenting, what happens is even if you have a husband and wife in the home, it becomes all about the kids. The kids become the center of the universe. Everything is managed around them. And what happens is the way that children feel the most secure is when mom and dad are together as a unit. They don't feel more secure because mom and dad are making them the center of the universe. Kids feel most secure when mom and dad are the center of the universe. Kids are an add-on to that family. They're an add-on. They're subordinate to that because then they know that there's a covering for them. And so it's important. What happens is sometimes when families try to blend, coming out of a bad breakup, a lot of times the parent then becomes so focused on the children, not wanting the children to go through any more pain, that child or those children become their world and it's all about them. And then you get a couple that then is going to get married, and without the ability to shift attention to the other spouse and let the other spouse become number one now, there's real conflict that gets set up in homes. And so you'll have a situation where the husband is always being subordinated to the kids, or the wife is being subordinated to his kids, and they know I'm not number one in this home. That actually sets a home up for conflict and insecurity. So it's kind of one of those things that you really want to watch out for, the whole child-centered type thing.
Yeah, we had our granddaughter, one of our granddaughters for a while, and one of the things we did with her was I would ask her, who's my number one? And she would say, Grandma. And I would say, who's my number two? And she'd say, I am. Because we wanted her to see that we were not just a united front, but also, the relationship she's going to see in us is going to set the pattern for what she's looking for in a relationship, and it also sets a great pattern for, the connection with God is first,
Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't do that, what happens is the husband and wife, if they're child-centered, those children grow up and it's all about their whole world. Those children move out, and all of a sudden the husband and wife look at each other when the kids have moved out, and they go, who are you? Because they've lost connection with each other through that.
An interesting statistic is when you have, children go to two different homes, the children come back with their own children or in college to the home that had the structure and the order. So we worry because we have Disneyland daddies and Disneyland mommies, and we don't, and that's not the home with the structure. But the safe home is the home with the rules.
That's really good, and that's important, I think, for some people to hear here today. Let's talk about parenting styles and some things that we've seen. One of the things we've seen is the rise of what are called helicopter parents. This is how it's defined. It's characterized by a helicopter-like tendency to hover over children and swoop in and rescue them at the first sign of trouble. It said, I don't want my kids to experience any pain. I don't want them to experience any adversity. As a matter of fact, if you're in education, if you're a teacher, you've met with the parents that if the kids have had a bad experience, whose fault is it? Your fault, right? And these behaviors can grow. And it even goes on like this, that parents will attend their adult children's job interviews or call college professors to argue over a grade. College counselors across the nation are reporting higher rates of general anxiety in this generation's crop of students. And kids who say that they had over-controlling parents have higher levels of depression and reported feeling less satisfied with family life. This is a real thing, isn't it? This is a real thing.
Yeah, actually, when I went to college, I was told a story about a mom who she brought her kid to move her into school, and then got a hotel room and stayed for months, to the point where the dad called the university and said, "Can you tell my wife to leave? She won't listen to me." And so the university had to go to her and say, you need to go home and let your kid be a college student. So the mom was asked to leave. The kid was bringing laundry to the hotel. I mean, it was a whole deal. So they said, you need to leave and let this kid be a college student. And so I think a lot of us as parents, we want to protect them, to shield our kids. We don't want them to experience the things we've experienced. But the way God has set it up is he's kind of set you up to give small amounts of responsibility over time. And so as we have kids, eventually they have the ability to pick out their own clothes, and so you let them make that decision. And then maybe when they get into middle school, they're doing their laundry, they're packing their lunch, you're doing things like that. They may be able to pick a sport that they want to do. They get into high school and you're letting them do more and more after school type stuff. They get their car, that's a huge rite of passage for kids. And so over time, God's giving us opportunities as they get older and have more responsibility to kind of give them the ability to have some freedom. And with that comes, expectations of how they handle that freedom. Eventually to the point where they go off to college and you say, okay, go. Here you go. I've raised you to make a wise choice. I've raised you to be a godly adult, and so go and do that. And I think a lot of parents go, do this and don't do this, and you give them a big list, rather than just saying, hey, I want you to know why this is a good decision or why this is a bad decision, and teaching them to reason through that for themselves. Mm-hmm. So.
One of the most important things we do in parenting is we help our children, especially early on, to connect poor choices with painful consequences. Really, the goal of discipline is to help them to connect those dots. And as they learn through that process, they hopefully will learn that we have their best interest in mind, because later on, they're not going to be afraid of getting a whooping from mom or dad anymore, right? They're going to be pretty tall, pretty big. They can take it. They can take you, right? And by the time we've done the part of helping connect the dots, we want them now to be motivated by their concern of how their actions affect their relationship with us. And that's the highest form of being able to help them to grow as individuals. I want to move into something here that deals with kind of the brokenness of so much parenting that isn't working well. And then we're going to get into things that are working well. And I want to talk about love versus emotional hunger, which is a big issue. I want you to listen to this. Emotional hunger, this is about how you relate to your children. Emotional hunger may be expressed in anxious over-concern, overprotection, living vicariously through one's child, or an intense focus on appearances. Parents who behave in this manner exert a strong pull on their children that drains a child of his or her emotional resources. Parents often confuse their own intense feelings of need and anxious attachment for genuine love. They fail to make a distinction between emotional hunger, which is a strong need caused by deprivation in their own childhoods, and genuine feelings of tenderness, love, and concern for a child's well-being. And so a person has emotional hunger when they hug their kids. they're medicating something inside of them. They're taking something from the kid. A parent that is healthy when they're hugging their kids knows they're giving something to their child. And so the over preoccupation with with children, their life, and being so wrapped up in all that often comes from a place of brokenness. So where do you start with something like that, Sharon?
Well, it's a very good point, because we are expecting our children and our grandchildren to fill a void in us that can only be filled by God. So we're starting to work on your own relationship. I remember a couple years ago, my 14-year-old's here with me today, my granddaughter, and when she was, I think, about 13, turning 13, and my birthday was coming up, and I was counting on her doing something, because my husband works a lot, so I'm with my grandkids a lot. And she had wanted to be with her friends, and I remember saying to myself, get a grip. And so I said to her, oh, of course, this is a time for you to be with your friends, because I don't want my emotional needs to be met by my grandchildren. They need to have those developmental stages and move on and have fun. But unfortunately, and especially parents who want their kids to sleep with them and want to, still do things for them. Never do a thing for a child that they can do for themselves. And not saying when they're sick or something like that, but they need to learn autonomy, and autonomy is learning to take care of yourself, self-soothing. So many parents are so worried about their child going to bed and going to sleep, and they have to be there with them. And I'm like, they have to learn to self-soothe. If they awaken during the night, they need to learn to go to God and say some prayers and storms and stuff. And I'm not saying we don't have to be there. Like I said, when there's a hurricane or they're sick, I'm not talking about those. I'm just talking in general. To try to keep letting them make choices. Again, I'm usually saying to them, what do you think the answer should be? What do you think you should do about that?
Yeah, that's good. Russ? Good.
I think too, with that, drawing your emotional fulfillment from your child, what you're patterning is, a life without God, really, because that's where the parent should be getting it from. If you're patterning, I'm going to get my emotional needs met by you, who are you teaching them to do? What kind of healthy relationship can they have as they get older, if that's what they're patterning, and they see you just continuing that? We've seen people who do that with their children, and then they do it again with their grandchildren, and it just perpetuates that.
Yeah, and so let's talk about people that are like hitting it out of the ballpark. Parenting that's done great, regardless what the family looks like. What are some of those things that are just like wins? When you see it, you're like, that is awesome. What are some of the things that you guys see?
I think a huge thing is you don't want the only time your kid gets one-on-one time with you to be when they're in trouble. And so parents that I see who are crazy successful are the ones who make it a priority to spend time with their kids. And not just, 1-on-3, say you have 3 kids, but taking each kid and giving each of them, individual time intentionally with them. And so, like, for my family growing up, my dad would take me on a buddy date, is what we called it. And we'd go to Starbucks, and he'd say, what's God been showing you? What's going on in your life? And he wanted to know about me, and he was invested in me. And so that's huge. I think if kids know that you care about them more than just how successful they are in school or sports or whatever, and they just want to be with me and spend time with me, that is huge toward rocking it as a parent.
Your dad took you to Starbucks?
Oh, yeah.
God bless him.
I started drinking coffee when I was 3, so...
It's amazing. What a great dad.
He's a great
awesome.
dad, yeah.
He is hitting it out of the park, man. That's like a grand slam all day. What else do you guys see in parents that are just really rocking it?
Parents that delight in their child and spend time with them, like Jason says. Even 15 minutes. Just set a timer for 15 minutes and just say, I have 15 minutes right now. You don't need big, you don't need expensive, an ice cream cone at McDonald's, just that ride there and the ride back, the ride to Starbucks and back. I mean, it's not the quantity, it's more of that you notice, that you listen, and I just find my parents that are enjoying their children and laughing. I think laughing and joking and we play a lot of pranks on each other. I think that's fun. I'm told them one day they're going to have a heart attack, but they're always pranking me.
That's awesome. And that whole delighting in your kids in a way that they know that you delight them. That's so cool because what you're doing is you're really modeling how God feels about your kids, that God delights in you. One of the things I used to do with the boys is when they would do something good, when they were kind to somebody or generous or anything like that, is I'd say, that is so cool what you did. And when I look at the kind of person you are now, I am so excited about the kind of person you're going to be when you grow up. Man, I just love that about you. And it's not then just about the behavior, but it's about the person that they are. In the same way when we do discipline, it's not just, we don't want them to think you're bad. We could say, no, those actions are bad, but you're good. But your actions, those aren't good actions. But just having that delight in kids in a way that kids know it. They're not the center of the universe, but they get that focused attention, that date time. Russ, do you have something?
I would say to help with that, remembering that the sin and the sinner are two different things. That the problem, the conflict didn't start with them. It actually came down through you and generations before you, because then you separate your responsibility and you're able to enjoy them when you're not trying to conform them to a mold that even you can't fit. You know, you have the room to enjoy them, and you're dealing with the action as an action and not as them themselves.
Yep, that's awesome. Well, listen, you guys, here's the good news, is God is on your side. When it comes to family, when it comes to relationships, God is on your side. And when you keep your heart open to Him, speaking to your heart, revealing opportunities, teaching moments that He's creating, and you step into those moments when you're present with your kids and God knows that you're taking that time, He's gonna create all kinds of opportunities for you to parent your child in a way that they know that God loves them, God's crazy about them, and that they're right on track. And so with knowing that God is on your side, you can have total peace about that. Guys, let's give it up for these guys and just say thank you. Thank you, guys. That was awesome. That was awesome. And so what we're going to do is, in a moment, I'm going to close in prayer. Before I do that, Jason and Sharon and Russ, they're going to make themselves available here. Sharon's got some books with her, some resources, if you want to talk with her. Also, check out your resource list that's in your outline. There's some amazing resources there. If you have any questions about Right Now Media, the resources we have there, or about the baby dedication sign up, or about the War Room groups, feel free to go back to the Connect Room after we pray, and we'll be happy to talk with you there. So guys, let's all stand up and let's just pray and ask God's blessing upon all the families here. All right, everybody got one thing? Got one thing you're going to take? Okay, that was almost a reaction. Good. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace and the fact that, God, you love our families more than we do. You love our kids, our grandkids, foster kids. You love our stepkids. You love our parents. You love everybody more than we do. And so, God, keep our hearts open and listening. Help us to be people that are walking in wisdom, people that are loving well, people, God, that no matter how crazy our families are, that there's always room for you to do something crazy beautiful in our families. Lord, we thank you. We ask that you would do that in all of us in Jesus' name. And everybody said, Amen. Have an awesome day, you guys.